the lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between.
Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I was going to cut that short. That's what I told Robert. But then I was doing some other stuff and figured let it ride. So what's up, brother? How we doing today?
Good. We got the Wisconsin Supreme Court race to talk about. That's coming up. We got your new polling
So
data
much
and
to
information, and the big topic, Trump versus DeSantis, because I see a lot of myths out there about just the objective political reality, whether anybody likes or dislikes either one of them. There's
That's
a
right.
political reality that's not being dealt with, both in terms of what DeSantis's actual record was on the pandemic, his claim to Piers Morgan that he would have fired Fauci, and why he knows that's completely hogwash. Actually,
Nobody could have fired Anthony Fauci. Nobody.
Right. I guarantee you, Trump wanted to fire him about 100 times. If Trump could have gotten near him and got his hands on him, the little fellow would have been swimming in the Potomac permanently. But there are legal limits on what Trump could do, as CNN talked about at the time, by the way. So but also we have DeSantis taking, or people on his behalf. The part of this Trump DeSantis debate for me happened with Steve Deese, a good conservative from Iowa, very smart, very well connected there. But he got a lot of stuff about DeSantis dead wrong. It's just myths. I think he's mistaken. I don't. Steve's a very honest, straightforward guy. So it wasn't. But it told me how deep the DeSantis mythology goes. And then we have the other aspect that we've been talking about for years, which is the Republican Party's political analyst still not recognizing that the Bush coalition is dead, DOA, and they're pretending it's not. I see these people who are clearly sincere people saying, oh, we got to go with DeSantis because only DeSantis can win Wisconsin. And it's like, what world are you living in? Have you not been to Wisconsin? What happened when we put Paul Ryan, a Wisconsinite, on the ticket in 2012? Did Wisconsin go more Republican, or did it go more Democratic than the rest of the country once again? So I think it's useful to remind people of those political realities that if you're looking at this objectively, there's only one conclusion, which is only Trump can win in 2024. A Trump-ish candidate that had all of Trump's policies could have also won in 2024, but that ain't DeSantis or anybody, and he's not anywhere close to it. So,
can I jump in here real quick? Because
Yeah.
I do have to say something. I mean, not that I ever take this stuff personal, but the fact is, Robert, I don't buy this thing. The Trump indictment is why DeSantis started to fall. And just so everybody knows, because there's been a massive attack launched on me over the weekend because they knew this poll was coming. Apparently, even market sites got to look into it. It looked like somebody even tried to launch a DDoS against our account on market site to prevent the poll from being released. Unbelievable. But that really is.
DeSantis has some friends that rhyme with DS as well. It's not just the Sims for DeSantis. We'll get into a little bit of DeSantis history and why folks were reasonably skeptical about how he would be on a national stage. But yeah, so no surprise that there's some allies of DeSantis that might have been trying to sabotage things.
Well, that Sunday I put up, something on Twitter because the truth is Trump in our polling has been lower than other primary polling that we've seen. He's been at around 43 is like normally where we had Donald Trump. This time was different because he had a 24-hour period where he touched 60. He held it. And when you average that together, it does damage to the overall support. So when I put that up there, people started to go nuts. I started getting calls from donors over the weekend, basically just for people who don't understand what's going on. DeSantis and Team DeSantis just had a meeting with people. They're donors that are Trump skeptics, donors that were 100% behind DeSantis. And they basically all left the room saying, call us when you're competitive again. You're not ready for prime time. This is what I'm going to tell everybody what is really happening. So when my poll was coming out, immediately I started getting calls, a lot from some very same people saying, listen, we just got a message. It's like this whole slew of attack against you. And, it has to do, they're bringing up your Georgia polling and they're lies even. If you want to attack me on something, attack me on Pennsylvania in November. That pisses me off. You might hurt my feelings on that one. But these are actual twists and lies, Robert, that I said that Kemp could not win. And even in the quote, it says in the message this one couple gave me, it says in the message, they're screenshotting tweets. It says at this time, all right? And it's from 2021. And truth be told, 20-something% did have a great deal of animosity towards Brian Kemp. But what happened? Purdue lost the primary. By the way, what did he get in that primary? Exactly what we said he would get, about a quarter of the vote, which is about as much as who said they had an animus towards Kemp in 21. By the way, I don't know. Follow along, folks. I know it's kind of hard for you. But then when Purdue lost, him and Trump both said, okay, Stacey Abrams is such a threat, such a disaster. We appreciate it. It was a tough primary. Now it's time to support Brian Kemp. And they held their nose and they voted for Brian Kemp, even though 23% of them disapproved of him. So they still did it. And by the way, our final poll in Georgia was Kemp +7. He won by 7 points. So, I mean, the lies, it sounds a lot like Democratic. This is what Nate Silver does to me. So if you want a comparable example, folks, for those of you who are like MAGA out there and think you're MAGA, this is what Karl Rove does. This is what Nate Silver does. This is not, what people that you think reflect your values do. But, anyway, I was simply making an observation and being objective. All right. So this is what we have now. And for those of, because I can see in the comments, don't you think it's a little bit, listen, Harris Sachs and I have no interest in making Trump's polls look better for him. Spencer Kimball at Emerson has no interest in making his polls look better for him. The New York Times Siena poll has no interest in making Trump's poll numbers look better for him. And by the way, the allegation that Trump is somehow funding these polls is ridiculous. We are publicly funded.
There's a lot of confession through projection going on.
And that's what just happened in Axios, isn't it, Robert? So the poll that just came out, Public Opinion Strategies, which was placed in Axios, not covered by Axios, it was placed, was conducted by the same polling firm that worked for Mitt Romney in 2012, and they are somehow funded by a DeSantis supporting group, but not connected or affiliated. But folks, listen, support who you want. You're free to do that. Don't fall for the oldest tricks in the playbook and then try to smear me. All right? Because
and anybody out there who wants to bet DeSantis, let me know. I'll take any bet. I told people to sell DeSantis when he got to 31, 32% in the future presidential polls. So that's not.
Well, yeah, that's where we had him. That was just high in our polling, 29 to 31%, which is
exactly. And they had him as a more likely to win the presidency than either Trump or Biden in 2024 in the betting odds markets just a month ago.
That's
and I was like, that's, there's weakness. And as soon as he made this disastrous set of decisions over the last couple of weeks, but if you really believe in him, I'm happy to take your money. I'm happy to take your kids' money. I'm happy to take your grandparents' money. You can bet anything you want, and I'll happily take it from you because DeSantis has that much chance of being elected president in 2024. Big fat zero, zilch, zunka, nada.
Robert, this is, again, I don't buy this indictment thing, had a backfire. This was something I had been, and not just me.
No,
Nate Cohen wrote an article about it.
This was a golden opportunity. He was given a golden opportunity to do this in the right way politically, and he just blew it up. And then you do your big intro interview with Piers Morgan, and then you do your book selling. And by the way, I said right away, when that book hit #1, I was like, okay, I'm not buying it. I'm sorry. I don't believe that there's tons of people that just can't wait to buy a political book in general, least of all buy one from DeSantis.
Well, you know how they do that, Robert.
Well, exactly. And people said, no, you don't understand. Barnes sold out my bookstore. Da, da, da. By the way, that's an old scheme. You put too few books in the local bookstores. You're like, wow, it doesn't sell out.
By the way, Ted Cruz did it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guess what I'm getting emails from, and you may be getting some of these, various Republican donor groups across the country. Guess what they have a bunch of excess of? A bunch of extra DeSantis books. Give us money and you get a personally signed DeSantis book. So what I suspect, this is a money laundering scheme, frankly.
They all do it, though. They all
Murdoch, big donors, publisher with publisher ties, paying off DeSantis, say, hey, run for office. It will make you personally wealthy. You've never been personally wealthy. We'll do it through the book deal, just like we did it for old Joe, just like before he became president. Where did he get that $7 million boost from after he's vice president? From his so-called book deal. Does anybody think tons of people were lining up to buy Sleepy Joe Biden's book?
Hillary Clinton, same thing. This is a long-term.
Michelle Obama. Now, Michelle Obama, I have no doubt, has legitimate interest, but some portion of that is clearly inflated. It's the easiest bribery scheme in the world. Give them $1 million. But who comes up with the idea we're going to launch your campaign with a soft book tour, and then we're going to stick you on with Piers Morgan? These are people. The people running DeSantis's campaign right now are incompetent. They sound like Karl Rove. They sound like Jeb Bush. And that's probably not a coincidence since Karl Rove slipped up and said he was running the campaign behind the scenes. So DeSantis decided to line up with the Bushites. It was a major mistake. I don't know if you've heard this, but from independent sources, but I've had 3 different independent sources recently confirm that DeSantis's people were going to get DeSantis on the ticket as of July 2022. Until he got pitched that Trump was going down, that he was the salvation. Well, we both know what he did during his donor. He was telling all the donors he wasn't going to run in 2022. All of a sudden, it switches in August when he gets tipped off about the raid. He doesn't do anything about it. He could have at least done some political theater about it. He doesn't. And in the fall, you got wind that DeSantis was thinking about reversing course. That's when Trump figures out he is actually reversing course and comes after him. And I always thought he was never dumb enough to take the bait to run.
He was a shoo-in. I can tell you he was a shoo-in for VP. He was a shoo-in. Look, I'm gonna, you know what? Let me play something from Getz before we get into these poll numbers. You also just reminded me, because you brought up Michelle Obama. Robert, historically, you're like me. You're a historian. You love history. There is no comparable. I spent 3 days looking with, not the entire 3 days, but spent 3 days going back trying to research where I could find some comparable example, and I could not find one. Even Herbert Walker Bush and Jimmy Carter, not comparable. Joe Biden is in uncharted territory with his weakness in the Democratic nomination to be renominated. No incumbent. And I'm just going to show everybody what that number is, because it has not been circulated like the Republican numbers have been. Joe Biden, we have at 31.2%. In the raw, which was basically, it's always oversample, so you don't underrepresent. It was even for Democrats, too urban and too educated. So it pulled them down a little bit. And also by region, the Northeast likes to participate, but they're, truth be told, they're 17, 18% now to 20, if they're lucky, percent of the overall national vote, depending on how you allocate states for Northeast. But because we put Pennsylvania in there, our Northeast number is a little bit higher. And it's technically mid-Atlantic, but Robert, 31.2% with Michelle Obama at 12.2. Robert Kennedy's at like 3% because I don't think anybody really knows he's running. But when we go over it, remind me to show you if Democrats were smart, they would nominate RFK. And it's like 40% of his vote would vote for Donald Trump. So it's a totally different coalition, which again, I said this and it's because it's true. The DeSantis coalition by age, we're going to look at it even against Biden, looks like a George W. Bush coalition. The problem is it's not 2004 anymore. And by the way, for those who are arguing about Wisconsin, George Bush lost Wisconsin. He lost them twice, even though he came very close. You have to do two things. And I went over this with my locals community. One, you have to drive the share of evangelical vote about 5 points higher than modern Republicans have been able to do. Donald Trump has done that not once, but twice and exceeded it. Number two, you cannot win 58% of them or 60% of them like some of these Republicans do. Nikki Haley's in the 50s. DeSantis is in the 60s. Trump is at 77%. All right. So that is the difference between, and Wisconsin, huge evangelical vote. So these are the voters. We focused a lot on these suburbanites who are a certain kind of suburbanite. And we aren't measuring whether or not that voter that's turned off by Trump, that gets all the media play, are they as big as the unique Trump vote that comes out for Donald Trump? We measured it this time. Nobody else has done what we did this time. And while I've had the evidence to support me for years now, Robert, it's called 4 damn elections in a row. All right. They got Tudor Dixon lost Macomb County. All right. I mean, so going on and on and on and on. We'll get into this. I want to bring up, because I don't buy this indict thing. I think Steve Hilton, who people are like, oh, it's a bona fide member of Trump Inc. Somebody told me on Twitter. I don't care. He's a populist voice, and he's a voice that is somebody who represents a lot of the people that we're going to be looking at. They're like 12, 15% blocks we're going to be pulling out of here. And I think what happened here, Robert, is 1-2. 1, Karl Rove is in your ear. Paul Ryan's your buddy. Jeb Bush endorsed you. Followed by 2, Ukraine. And you sent me something when we come back, which is going to help to explain a little bit of why there's this internal struggle with DeSantis over Ukraine. The reason will be clear in a second. But let Steve Hilton, it's a little bit over a minute or something like that. But I think he does it justice to get at the heart of what we heard. Again, people always attack me like this is my personal opinion or something. I am regurgitating what I'm hearing voters tell me. That's what the People's Pundit does. Every pollster and political pundit or whatever has their own personal views. But I pride myself on giving a voice to the people that don't have one in the media. And they always happen to be a freaking majority, Robert. Always. And by the way, the JFK stuff is going to knock everybody's socks off. It really is. But remember that when we look at the age groups who support these different candidates and then their attitudes toward the deep state, their attitudes toward, the hostiles, whatever you want to call them. All right. So let's let Steve Hilton rock and we'll be back in a second.
That's not a plan. That's a slogan. We need a strategy to end the war. But our leaders talk as if they're perfectly fine with it going on forever, fueled by American money and Ukrainian lives. But honestly, blaming Biden, demanding accountability, wanting the Europeans to do more. That's the easy part. And many of the Republican presidential candidates made those points in response to a questionnaire from our friend and colleague Tucker Carlson. The hard question is, what would you do? Not a lot, according to this guy, Ron DeSantis, or as he perhaps should now be known, Ron DeCarkis. Because just like the hapless Democrat presidential nominee in 1988, DeSantis managed to look weak and incompetent all in one go. I've got nothing against the Florida governor, far from it. I was a huge admirer of his strong stand on COVID. He stood up to the groupthink, the media, he followed the science, he protected his state, and he deserves credit for that. But his first foray into foreign policy, let's just say, it seemed more provincial than presidential. A leading candidate making a massively consequential policy announcement in response to a questionnaire from a TV show, that is amateur hour. Calling the invasion of a sovereign country a territorial dispute, giving moral equivalence to the criminal and the victim. And then, instead of cleaning it up, making it worse. He tells our friend Piers Morgan he was mischaracterized. How can you have been mischaracterized when it was your own words that you freely sent in responding to a questionnaire? Piers and Tucker have completely different views on Ukraine, but Ron DeCarkis was trying to agree with them both. It is weakness and incompetence and flip-flopping and pandering, all squished into one deeply unserious episode. And that is deeply worrying when the threats to what America stands for are so serious.
So I can't, especially the last 45 seconds, I couldn't have summed up what we heard from people, which was that I was getting a little bit skeptical, and the Ukraine thing is like a litmus test. And Robert, then you found this. All right. So while we have the numbers, and actually let me go back to the Republican numbers because I love Glenn Greenwald. He does fantastic work. But last week or so, he puts up this thing and it shows that Republican voters in particular, who are younger, all younger voters, but even Republican voters are very non-interventionist. And he said, that's why they're so worried about Ron DeSantis. And I'm thinking to myself, what polling has Glenn Greenwald looked at? Look at Donald Trump's numbers with younger voters. He's beating Ron DeSantis among 18 to 24s 5-1. He's beating 25 to 20 Ron DeSantis among 25 to 29 voters almost. It's 4.5 basically to 1. 30 to 39, 47 to 12, 40 to 49. The prime working voter, salt of the earth, Midwest constituency. This is a huge chunk, this demographic in the Midwest. 59 to 19, 50 to 64, 54 to 26. Look at when we get older to the Mr. Rogers mindset. 65 to 74, Trump's lead dwindles 38 to 33. And then among 75 plus, it expands out a little bit, 46 to 24. The younger vote is a MAGA vote. I can't keep saying this over and over again. If you keep repeating something other than what I am saying right now, you're either lying or you're demonstrating your ignorance. Which one is it? At some point, you have to come to the table and admit which one it is. Because this, talk about the myths, this myth, Robert, that he's the one with the young coalition is a myth. Trump is the one with the non-interventionist coalition that is younger. They have to hope that they don't come out to vote, which is, by the way, Trump in this polling, if I wasn't using a more strict model, Trump would be at like 55. But because I'm taking into consideration that older people vote in primaries more, right? Even though history is kind of bucking all this lately, isn't it? Right? All of these historical norms are starting to get shattered. Like, for instance, it's true that early leaders in nomination polls tend to not be the nominees. However, two things I'd say to that. One, you have no example in modern history of a well-liked, still regarded, beloved even, president among his own party, beloved, where he is running, and the history is different here. We're in an uncharted territory of this massive number of voters who think that not only did Donald Trump not receive a fair re-go, but that he was robbed of his first term with Russia collusion. Like, you know who explained this best? And it's amazing that she knows the mind of the Republican voter better than most Republican pundits. Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly, I'm listening to her on an interview the other day, and she's trying to explain to somebody they're never going to abandon him. And this guy's like, oh, you don't think so? I mean, I really like Ron DeSantis. You don't think so? He got to 31 before people started to look at him. And now this is hurting again. I don't know what else to tell people. Look at by the way, let's look by education, Robert. You're going to love this. By education, pre-high secondary, 59-2. High school, GED, 59-17. Some college associate, 55-25. Undergrad gets a little closer. It's Trump +9, which, by the way, he retook a couple of months ago. We had not even 6 weeks ago. We had Ron DeSantis leading with this demographic. And post-grad, actually, we've had still a little bit Trump. Republican post-grad can be a little bit different, but it's still Trump +21. All right. Look at income brackets, which I was trying to talk to Steve Bannon on War Room. For a long time, this was not the case. Trump did better with, voters who made more money but did not have a 4-year education or higher. That was like the most Trump vote you could get, someone who did well financially, but they did it because they work hard, not because they have an education. They built a business or something. That was the most Trumpy voter out there, along with the working class, who are just like, your steel worker or something. Now look, under 30,000, 57-16, 30 to 50,000, 57-17, 50 to 100,000, 48-26, 100 to 200,000, 46-26, 200,000 or more, 39-19. All right. And if you go through the Biden versus Trump and Biden versus DeSantis, you will see Trump leads in every single income bracket except for 200,000 or more. All right. Where he trails Biden 54-34. DeSantis trails with that group too, but by a bigger margin, 57-24. Yet Joe Biden leads among those who make 100 to 200,000, and DeSantis only leads among the 30 to 100,000. Under 30,000, the underclass, that is a Democratic vote. Trump is now carrying that, and DeSantis is losing it, like a traditional Republican loses it against a Democrat. This is a George W. Bush versus America First coalition. If you can't see it, I can't help you. What are your thoughts, Robert, before I bust the letter up to John Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. One is that people are forgetting that why the Democrats called it the blue wall. That from 1988 to until Trump, before Trump, the Democrats have an edge in the Electoral College. They could lose the popular vote and win the Electoral College. People have forgotten this because of two elections involving Trump. Prior to Trump, and the reason is simple, Republican base is evangelicals, and evangelicals are underrepresented in the Electoral College. By contrast, Trump's base was the working class, and the working class is overrepresented in the Electoral College. So the idea that just this idiot for Town Hall wrote a piece about Iowa and Ohio are just locks for any Republican.
No, they're not.
What a moron. You have to be a complete idiot to say that disqualifies you from ever talking again about elections. Iowa and Ohio has been dead even for over a century. It's the swing state. And why? Because it's a hodgepodge of middle America. You got some Yankees, you got some Southerners, you got some Italians and Irish and East European immigrants, you got some Germans, you got some agriculture, you got some natural resources, you got some industry, you got a hodgepodge that just like
Obama
America.
Appalachia, which, by the way, voted for Obama over Mitt Romney. Iowa swung against Republicans in 2018. If there was any big ticket races in Iowa in 2018, Republicans would have been swept out of office. They were lucky they just lost districts they never should have lost, and lost legislative districts they really never should have lost. They were
blowout states because of Trump.
It's Trump.
And JDV. Right. I mean, again,
31 pivot counties in Iowa alone. 31.
Yes. Counties that swung from Obama. I mean, people are just forgetting how easy Obama won these two states just in 2012 in a bad economy with an unpopular president on all policies, popular personally, but unpopular on policy. And yet he won with ease in Iowa and Ohio. And Now any Republican would win them. The arrogance of the Republican punditry is to assume they will always get the Trump voter, and that the only problem is they assume what happens down ballot when Trump is at the top of the ticket will happen when Trump is not at the top of the ticket. Then when Trump is at the top of the ticket, as you've been explaining for years, Trump adds more to the party than the party adds to him. Trump brings in Trump voters who are coming to vote for him and then vote Republican down ballot because Trump's on the ticket. We saw in 2018, we saw again in 2022, that if Trump's not at the top of the ticket, they don't come out and vote in enough numbers, particularly in the industrial Midwest and the Southwest. These are areas that don't have a lot of evangelicals. These are non-religious working class voters. They may be religious in mindset, but they're not religiously observant. Think these people are you're more likely to catch them at a bar on Sunday than in church on Sunday. That's who these voter groups are. And the illusion that they will come back in for any gentrified Republican when they never have they been more likely to vote Republican than the rest of the electorate unless Donald Trump was on the top of the ticket. So that's the delusion, like you identified. These very few polls that have shown DeSantis doing better than Trump against Biden. If you actually look at their polls, they don't actually show that. They show a small percentage of people going from Biden to undecided. Not going from Biden to DeSantis, and those are your upscale suburbanites that might flip back, and it's like 1 or 2%. You dig into the data, and what you find is what you have, which is Trump doing better against Biden already. I mean, DeSantis should be doing better against Biden because he's mostly unknown to most of the country. So he doesn't have the negatives and the hits that Trump has had. That are going to accumulate now in the near short term. And that, I mean, as soon as DeSantis took any hits, he dropped like a rock. That never happened with Trump. It never happened to Trump in the primaries, either of Trump. I mean, Trump took all kinds of hits. He never dropped like a rock, and like DeSantis just did, because down deep, DeSantis is just another generic Republican. And in the current American electorate, a generic Republican.
He didn't have to be, though, Robert.
Win.
Let me say this, though. He didn't have to be. He
did
not have to be.
Agreed. There are people in his camp that were aligned.
It's who he got around him.
Yep. Yeah, they were on the Trumpian side that had it aligned for him to be the VP, that told him not to run, that it was suicide. I mean, George Soros comes out last month and says his dream is for DeSantis to run against Trump because it will destroy both of them. The fact that DeSantis supporters can't get this through their head, they are killing his political career by telling him to run against Trump.
That's what's up right now. And by the way, people ask me all the time, and not just, followers and stuff. I had a donor couple asked me this the other day because they were like, I would say Trump skeptics, let's call them Trump skeptics. They want somebody new, but they like Ron DeSantis and they don't want him to destroy his career if it ends up that he can't win. And by the way, if you think these people are alone, this is NBC News. This is that donor gathering I'm telling you about. They covered it. NBC News. Quote, they liked him. Many of them might even support him. The person who was at the event said to DeSantis, but they thought on balance that his long-term future was better without him trying to take Trump head on. He will get scarred up, the person said. All right, this is what we're showing on the screen right now, because again, we hear a lot of talk about it, Robert, but other than me, nobody has ever tried to actually measure it or do it credibly. Right. So here we ask, thinking about the general election, if it's called piping, we're taking the response of the voter, the respondent, the interviewee from a previous question and inserting it into, it'll dynamically change what we ask them on a subsequent question. So if they chose Trump, then we would say, if Donald Trump does not receive the Republican nomination, if they chose DeSantis, if Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, down the line. So if your choice does not receive the Republican nomination, would you vote for the party's nominee? Consider voting for the Democratic nominee. And by the way, we asked Democrats this too, or not vote at all. 15% of Trump's vote said, I would consider voting for the other party. That's actually less than some of Nikki Haley's support, percentage-wise, not total, not how much they represented the overall vote, but percentage of their vote. That's actually less than some of the other candidates like Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Vivek, and Mike Pompeo, Tim Scott. This is exactly what I have been talking about when I say that Trump gives more than he ever got from them, because they have voters, even though they're a smaller percent of the overall electorate, They have voters who will say, well, I'm taking my ball and going home. Well, now you have Trump's voters doing the same. They'll consider voting for the other nominee. All right. You have a lot of people who would vote for Mike Pence who would say, I'll vote for Joe Biden. Tim Scott, same thing. But they're not size-wise, overall, proportionately here. I'm talking about proportionality. They are dwarfed by Trump's unique vote. Dwarfed. 15% of Trump is about normal for some of the other ones. DeSantis is 14. It's the I would not vote at all. This is a Trump or bust vote. Talking 12%. Even if I'm off by 2%, Robert, and there's 80 million turnout on his end, it's 8 million voters. It's 8 million voters. And if you think I'm wrong, I would strongly suggest you look not just at the last 4 election cycles, look at the last 6. How did John McCain do? How did Mitt Romney do getting these people out? Sean Trendy wrote, and I quote, the case of the missing white voter after 2012, after Mitt Romney. Here's the real kicker here, folks. They're not white. They're not all white. There was a whole segment about this on CNN the other day. And what they were arguing was, this is the coalition that Donald Trump claims he would get, but didn't get in 2016 or 2020. Now, however, that coalition is coming to fruition. You look at in the Republican primary, then look at him versus Biden. In the Republican primary, he's taking 52% of the white vote, but he's winning African Americans almost 4-1. He's winning Hispanics more than 2-1, Asians 5-1, American Indians, 32-20, Alaskan Natives. The samples get small here, but when you average all those smaller groups together, you're talking about a 4-1 advantage for Donald Trump among non-whites. They will make up about 20% of the Republican primary electorate, roughly that. But then if you look at Biden versus Trump is taking 16% of the black vote. There's a lot of undecided Hispanics, but he's already at 32. Okay. Watch DeSantis. With those two groups alone, DeSantis is at a very typical 9% among black voters, very typical of a Republican, and he's at 26% among Hispanics. So for all this talk, he won Florida. It's a gubernatorial election. It's totally different. And Florida, because Donald Trump let in all of those Venezuelans and naturalized them and ended wet foot, dry foot. All right, Obama's changes to wet foot, dry foot. They are massively Republican now. What I'm trying to say is a lot of these people are comparing apples to oranges. That's not a national electorate. It will not be like that everywhere. Tell me, Robert, why did Republicans get their ass kicked in South Texas last year in 2022? How did that happen? When Trump carried Texas 15. Myra Flores lost in 34. That would have been dead even against Biden. How did that happen? So I think Steve Cortez has said it best. He's done numerous videos about it. Go back and look at Starr. Go back and look at Zapata. I don't have to go over this all over again. These people will vote for Donald Trump, but they will not vote for anyone else. And again, you vote for who the hell ever you want to vote for. I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you, stop blowing smoke up my you-know-what. I'm so sick of hearing it. And by the way, maybe things like this are what's problematic. I'll let you take this away, Robert. What is this? What is this?
Yeah, just to reaffirm and wrap up your point on the poll, the two group of voters that only Trump now can get is one is the older independent vote. And I keep hearing, only Trump can't win the independent voter. That's because they're pretending the independent voter is an upscale suburbanite like the media pollsters pretend. The actual independent voter that matters is a working class small town voter in places like the industrial Midwest and Southwest, who is more likely to be found in a bar than a church on a Sunday. If you understand, they don't like being preached at. They don't trust Baptist preachers. They don't trust popes. Right. They don't trust woke overlords. But it's not what drives them. They're not obsessed over the issue one way or the other. They're obsessed over economics, over national security. Is my job going to get shipped overseas? Is my kid going to get shipped overseas? That's what drives them. And one of the things that hurt DeSantis recently was people realizing that to the degree they were paying attention, where he got some drop, was people realizing, DeSantis sounds a lot more like a typical Republican than a Trumpish Republican, which was inevitable when you're going to attack Trump and go after Trump and contest with Trump anyway. But that group only Trump right now can get, and that's a key voter in the industrial Midwest and parts of the Southwest, because a lot of them, there's a lot of Wisconsinites that live in Arizona. You know, that's where a lot of them went to retire, that working class retiree base. A lot of them lived here in Vegas from the Midwest, came here and retired. And then the second group is the group you're identifying, which are the new Republicans. And these are voters that aren't core Republicans, that if you push them, they would say they identify more as an independent.
Pew did a great study on this, by the way. They did a great study. Skeptic conservative, government skeptic conservative. What did they call it? It's like when you're a populist and you lean towards like, MAGA, but you aren't particularly participatory because you feel like the system is inherently broken. And by the way, they're like 38% non-white. 38% non-white. Pew did a fantastic study on this. But I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, exactly. Because the second group you're identifying that only Trump right now reaches, that is a very marginal voter group. So you got this older group that's working class, independent, lives in the Midwest and in the Southwest, that's skeptical of the Republican Party because of its corporate ties and thinks of it as too religious, skeptical of the Democratic Party, especially under Obama because of its professional class prejudices and its biases against their interest in the everyday economy. So they dropped out. Many of them dropped out in 2012. The missing voter, as Sean Trendy wrote a whole book about it, that just disappeared. They overlapped in strong Perot areas in 92 and 96.
Yeah.
So that's one voter group that only Trump can get right now. And the other one is the group you're identifying that almost nobody is talking about. And this is the new MAGA folks, lean independent, think the Donald Reddit, think salty cracker, think I think it's now a Win site as well, but think salty cracker, think the meme makers. That's who these communities come from. And these are young. They're under a lot of them are Zoomers. They are or they are working class Mexican American, African American men who came to like Trump's style, like Trump's tenor, and thought Trump was really.
Robert, it's attitudinal. This is what
absolutely, and they think Trump's fighting for them,
Yeah.
and they see DeSantis, and they don't see a guy that's like that. They see and to the super chat question, what does Trump 2024 look like? A big mistake would be to focus on the professional suburbanites. No, professional suburbanites are not overrepresented in Wisconsin, Michigan, and other places. They are generally underrepresented. They're overrepresented in the polls of those states, and that's why those polls are so notoriously wrong, but they are not overrepresented. And the Romney model, there's two problems with it. One is it ignores these working class independent voter, ignores the new young MAGA voter that is either a young voter or is a sort of a meme-ish voter, or they're working class Mexican American, African American men. That's problem one with a let's focus on this professional suburbanite strategy. Problem number two is we just saw that lose. And not only lost for Romney. Romney was the tailor-made candidate to compete in the professional suburban areas, and he still lost to Obama badly in terms of the electoral.
Robert, let's go through this again because Arizona and Georgia people bring up a lot. Arizona and Georgia became problems for Republicans long before Donald Trump. The trend was there long before Donald Trump. It's because their share of the urban vote exceeded 60%. That's why North Carolina, traditional Republicans can still win. It doesn't have to be Trump because the share is only 42%. Republicans Purdue is a great example. Donald Trump outperformed David Perdue. Mitch McConnell and company thought that Trump was the reason why David Perdue got forced into a runoff with John Ossoff in the first place. And that was not the case. Without Trump on the ballot, Perdue performed Donald Trump in the Atlanta metro area. I just, in response to somebody on Twitter, put up Arizona using the census data as a share of the top ticket Republican share of the vote in these different by area types, rural, urban, and suburban. The trend has been declining for 20 years. In fact, ironically, in 2020, with Trump on the ballot, both urban and suburban, that trend not only was arrested, it slightly rebounded, but it just wasn't enough. All right. So, there was more share of the vote in those urban areas as a percentage of the total statewide vote. That is what's going on there. And by the way, there's two ways you got to combat that, because that's a great question by Tony that you picked out. You have got to run up these rural margins and slice off some of their urban vote while not getting killed in the suburbs. Let me show you something.
And the urban vote, you got to get basically you got to do better amongst black men. In particular, and other like also Trump did better amongst Asians and Mexican Americans who also are in Georgia, obviously a big contingency in Arizona. But I think so one is focus more on those working class independents, focus more on the new MAGA voter that's not a traditional Republican. Neither group is. They're overwhelmingly independent in self-identification, and where they register by party, they often register independent if they can. But the other factor is what the point you're making. The professional urban suburban voter, particularly of the millennial generation, is now a Democratic voter. Republicans got to quit pretending that they can get those voters back because they ran those. I mean, Oz was that kind of candidate in Pennsylvania, and he lost to a mentally handicapped candidate.
Why, Robert? Because he didn't do good enough in northeastern Pennsylvania.
He got crushed in Trump country, and he made almost no inroad. The Arlen Specter voter is mostly dead, people. Dead. Like some people say, well, why doesn't some of these Romney voters come back? Well, because some of them are dead. They're no longer alive. They're literally dead. That, it's been over 10 years since then. What's happened is the newer voter, that young millennial professional class voter that's voting, that loves Democrats right now, in 2012, they would have voted for Obama overwhelmingly. They would not have voted for Romney ever. They just were 15 or 16 at the time. The culture wars won amongst the left, won amongst the professional class. And so pretending that there's any votes to be got there was proven to be false in 2022 because nobody could get them. It didn't matter where they were running or how they were running. They didn't get them. So, and don't use gubernatorial races as a comparison. Those are useless.
They're totally
those
irrelevant.
Are state level, state issues, different dynamics. Look at running for the Senate. Look at running for Congress. Where did Republicans anywhere on any kind of ticket overperform? And it was pretty much nowhere. You can find like 2 or 3 races in the whole country where they ran with Romney level numbers amongst upscale suburbanites. The rest of the country, those voters have become Democratic voters. Ron DeSantis isn't getting them any more than anybody else is getting.
Look at it's right up there. And I had reversed urban and rural. So I went to the registered voter, but I fixed the likely voter, and I'll show you that too. But look at this, a great example. And Evan, this goes to your question. All right. Trump did so much better than both David Perdue and Herschel Walker in the Atlanta metro area. In all those counties you're talking about, he outperformed them, which was, well, how could that be? Herschel Walker is an African-American candidate. That's not doing it for that. That's not the point.
In fact, it actually triggered black snobbery. Walker underperformed amongst black voters more than anybody, particularly black voters in Atlanta.
It didn't have to, but he didn't get the support, Robert, and he couldn't make his case.
Well, Atlanta is notorious. Its black community is notorious for snobbery. I mean, this is where Du Bois was. I mean, this is a very, this was where
they also have their own little tinsel town. They have their diverse tinsel town.
They want someone that looks and sounds erudite. They don't want someone who sounds like he's from the country, as they would call. I mean, I heard more nasty comments from other black voters about Herschel Walker than anybody. And and then when I heard it, I was like, oh, I should have known this was coming. Because if you're familiar with the black community in Atlanta, there's just a history of interclass snobbery that is off the charts. I mean, before Chicago, Atlanta was the sort of heartbeat of black intellectual culture, and before the Harlem Renaissance. The
BLM, by the way, running on Showtime right now. We'll show you that from the 80s perfectly. Like the beginning of it, Atlanta's really like emerging as this culture center. And it always was, but how influential it was even to the people coming out of the D, which was it's a cool show. It is graphic and dirty, so I'm just warning you. But look at this, even among registered voters where Trump's got a 4-point lead and DeSantis is down by 2. Urban vote, Trump is getting about a third of the urban vote. He's over 50 in the rural areas, and he's ahead of Biden by 6 in suburbia. Now let's look at DeSantis, which, by the way, again, Robert will tell you, we did not have this in 2020. This is a very different race. DeSantis being down by 2 here is only getting a quarter of the urban vote. He is ahead in suburbia, but it's not by much. It's by about 3 points. That's it. And in rural, among rural voters, this tends to happen early, guys. Yes, DeSantis would run it up in rural areas, but the point is, this is very David Perdue-like to me. This is very Kelly Loeffler to me. This is very, Mitt Romney to me. This is a gross underperformance in rural America. And why is that? Because it really does come down, even though this is the giant, universe of registered voters, it really does come down, because I'll put it up right now, the likely, it comes down to who the hell is going to wind up coming out to vote, folks. I mean, and if it's Trump, it's just a different game.
Well, an example of that is,
better.
DeSantis didn't, people talk about the margin. That was mostly because a lot of Democrats didn't vote in Florida in 2022. DeSantis didn't get more votes. DeSantis, about 1 million of Trump's voters didn't turn out for DeSantis in 2022 either. His total vote totals were not exceptional at all. He hasn't shown any path or past of getting unusual turnout in his favor. Trump has done it repeatedly. Did it in the primaries, did it in the 2016 general election, did it again in 2020.
Robert, it's the same thing as Youngkin. It's a gubernatorial election. It was 1.2 million people missing from the electorate in Virginia. We don't know what would have happened if those voters would have come out. And people like the DeSantis supporters and the Youngkin lovers, and I like Youngkin, but they always like to point out how Youngkin overperformed with the margin among working class. Right, because the other professional class people who stayed home would have shrunk the overall share of the working class electorate. So, I mean, and by the way, the working class ones that might have come out might have been Biden voters and would have voted for Terry McAuliffe. You don't know that. I mean, so
the problem there is, aside from the uniqueness of gubernatorial versus federal office, Youngkin still barely won in a very favorable electoral environment.
Yes.
So why is that kind of candidate going to take back Virginia? Because that's their other excuse I get from people. They pretend Arizona is like it was 10 years ago. It's not. Yeah. Arizona is now much more Mexican-American than it was then. And its urban population is much more millennial than it was then. And that combination of the two has shifted the state to the Democratic side.
Yep.
So that it's to be very competitive. But it's a Democratic-leaning state in a generic race at this point. And then in the same, Nevada would go back to being a Democratic state with a traditional Republican top of the ticket. Laxalt proved that. Yeah. Laxalt ran a competent campaign, but all these people ran more conventional. Only J.D. Vance ran an aggressive populist campaign. We were complaining about it throughout the election. Masters didn't run a strong populist campaign. His advisors didn't recommend it. Laxalt didn't run a strong populist campaign. His advisors didn't recommend it. Walker didn't run a strong populist campaign. His advisors didn't recommend it. Often they were just desperate for McConnell to send some money in, and that wasn't worth the trade-off. Look at J.D. Vance. He ran almost even with Trump throughout the state. And in a state that, in 2018 voted Democrat for the United States Senate.
And almost for the governor. And almost, it was closer than it should have been.
People forget that. Tim Ryan, coming from the working class northeastern part of the state, would normally have dominated against anyone other than J.D. Vance. But that affluent suburbanite is not coming. One, there's not enough of them.
Did they come back for J.D. Vance? He grew up in the Cincinnati burbs. Did they come back for J.D. Vance? No.
None of them are.
They did not.
If you're around any of these voters, if you're around these people, these millennial professional class people, they are overwhelmingly Democratic voters now.
I'll get to your question, Matthew.
I thought, woke might matter. I thought schools might matter. I thought crime might matter. I thought immigration might matter. It didn't budge those communities at all. They stayed loyally Democratic throughout 2022. That they didn't move no matter who was running, no matter what was at the top, no matter what issue was present. Because many of these voters are woke. There's a reason why Don Lemon says he thinks there's a woke majority. In his world, there is. These are voters that, to the degree they care. So, and to the degree they care at all, they often just see it as a local or state issue, not a federal issue. That's, I think, the other thing that hurt DeSantis. His little book tour was all about local issues. He was talking about crime, talking about schools. That's not a presidential issue.
Did you read the Washington Post article? They compared DeSantis's stops in Iowa and other places to Trump's, and it was like him doing the book tour, and it was really handled, while Trump was like trying to get back to the 2016. He wasn't giving advance notice. He was just popping up at McDonald's. He was popping up at a farmer's residence out of nowhere, just like coming. It reminded me as I was reading it of what I saw in Manchester, New Hampshire in 2015. He just popped up in Manchester PD, dude. They were flocking to him. And then the fire department guys are like, hey, did you hear that Donald Trump is over with the PD right now? So they all got on the trucks, rolled on over there. He never gave them advance notice. And he was just out there shaking hands. And you know what he was saying? Things. And Don Smith, too, he's got a great story about this. Trump walks into a room full of skeptics, especially this one liberal woman who can't stand him. And he just shaking hands like, look, you know better than me about this issue. It was about veterans' health. And he walks out of there, not expected. And this woman is like, that son of a bitch, I may have to vote for him. Because she just was like taken over by how he was like listening intently. And I think to that extent, the big rally thing in Waco, which I have some clips I want to play, but I think that's all great for Trump. But that was what Trump, when I saw personally, running around chasing after him and other candidates, because I like to do that as a pollster, trying to see if what I'm seeing in the poll I can like recreate on the ground, or I can see it on the ground. And what Trump's rallies from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania and everywhere else were impressive, but that's not what impressed me. What impressed me was that face-to-face retail that he could do. And anyway, that Washington Post story, I got to tell you, the way they depicted and compared and contrasted them. And this gets to Matthew's question. Who's preventing Republicans from reaching out to these Trump voters? The handlers, Matthew, the handlers. Robert just rolled off. He just rattled out a series of campaigns that didn't do a good job versus some that did. What was the difference between J.D. Vance? He didn't fire the guys who won him the primary and bring on Mitch McConnell's guys because he thought that that's what he needed to do to get Mitch McConnell's support. A lot of these people relied on I don't want to say MAGA. It's so connected with Trump. But the new right mindset, the new right thinkers to get them through the primary, but then played party ball when it was time to pivot to the general. Voters like Trump's voters will sniff you right out if you do something like that. And they will stay home and they will let you lose by 12 points like they did to John Gibbs. They will let you lose. I could just keep going on. There's so many examples.
Masters campaigned more as a libertarian Republican than a populist Republican. He floated the idea of vote. Yeah, he floated that. Yeah, he floated the idea of privatizing Social Security, which is something, by the way, DeSantis is on record voting for over and over and over again. He's on the record of voting for raising the retirement age to 70 years old. This isn't just about saying it at some conference. The idiot voted for it in legislation they knew wasn't even going to pass, which made it even dumber. It's like,
but that's because back then, Robert, they didn't know. They didn't know where the Republican electorate was. They didn't understand what a Midwest coalition was. So they were still in this mindset. It wasn't until, and Bannon will tell you this, meeting with Trump in Trump Tower, he didn't even know how to spell populist. But, the bottom line was he articulated it. And Bannon was like, this is our guy. This is our guy, because he was running around trying to look for someone who could really be the champion of economic nationalism. And Trump got it, even though he didn't understand. What did he say? How did he say populism? You know this.
Popularism.
Popularism. That's what he said. That's exactly what he said. And Bannon was like, yeah, whatever. That'll work for now. But all these other Republicans were thinking, no, foreign interventions and cutting Social Security. And Trump was like, are you out of your mind? You'll never carry states like that you have not been able to carry. Speaking of which, let's put this letter up. Robert, this is a hell of a find. Robert will dig some. Oh, boy. I'll tell you. Let's show this to people. Again,
to give people a broader backdrop of DeSantis, he does have all the reason why there was skepticism about him in some communities is he has all the indicia of being a recruited candidate by the deep state apparatus and the Bushites. Military, so he has a working class background, which he has a way of telling people too often. When you have a real working class background, you don't have to keep telling them you're from the working class.
As a matter of fact, those of us who do don't really want to.
Yeah, or you just tell an ordinary story that shows how it's working class connected. You don't say, by the way, as a member of the working class, you know what I mean? He keeps doing that in a lame way, but he did have that background. But then he goes to Yale, Harvard Law, gets a gig in between the two, teaching at an elite private school in North Georgia. That's where the New York Times is sitting on a story they have
Yeah, they
of
are.
him partying with underage girls. That's where
They
that
are.
came from. New York Times already has the story. They already have the photos. They're just sitting on it, hoping he somehow gets the nod. No, the nomination, and then they're going to hit him with it, which, by the way, is a sign that they want him to run and want him to win the nomination. The fact that they're sitting on that story.
Well,
Because
they
again,
had an article trying to paint him as not a neo. In fact, saying that Karl Rove and the Bush Club people that are backing him are frustrated with him that he's not showing enough neocon tendencies. When you see an article like that in the New York Times, folks, just smell what's cooking. Because here, Robert pulled this up. All right. So this is problematic. By the way, TPP, I don't know how you sell that to Ohio. I don't know how you
for
sell
those
that.
that don't know, DeSantis was for all the bad trade deals, for all the bad.
Yeah.
So he goes to Yale, Harvard, in between an elite prep school, which is usually only somebody that's being recruited. At Yale, he's in the fraternity that the Bushes were in, that's aligned with Skull and Bones. Then nobody knows whether he was or what. He just denied he's in Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones membership list hasn't been public for almost 20 years now, so nobody knows who's in or in it, not in it. But he goes to Harvard Law. That's a little unusual. But after Harvard Law, he goes right into the Navy, where he gets a gig at Guantanamo. And I know he says he didn't see anything or witness anything. Not many people were being sent to Guantanamo as Harvard Law grads. Just saying.
I think Jack Posobiec would disagree with that. All right.
Maybe we'll see. And then he gets a deal working with the SEAL unit in Fallujah to clean up issues in Fallujah. He went there just a few years after that horrible probably a major war crime took place in Fallujah. Nobody knows for sure, but let's just say it was a very sensitive place. It's where you would send somebody that was there to cover up any problems, to be frank about it. Then from there, he goes and becomes U.S. attorney briefly in the Middle District of Florida, Tampa. When he's there, he gets child porn cases and Russian immigration cases. A little bit unusual combination for a young new U.S. prosecutor. They are sitting on cases where he cut sweetheart deals for people that were convicted of child porn. If you know the history of that, those are people that often have blackmail on other people. Robert Mueller did it famously for Asimov's son in the Northern District of California. That, within a month of him cutting that deal with Asimov's son, who was producing child porn, by the way, sending it to others on massive scale, which meant he had a list of people who would ordering it. Mueller became a director of the FBI. It's kind of interesting how all that worked. But a few days after 9/11, that's a forensic fingerprint of deep state ties, getting that kind of gig. Then he runs for Congress. One of the first people to back him is John Bolton. Gives you an idea. Once he's in Congress, he aligns with two groups of people: Tom Cotton and the neocons on foreign policy. That's why he gets, as a young congressman, gets sweet national security subcommittee gigs. Not everybody gets that. The only people getting those gigs are people that had committed themselves to be deep state allies. And then he aligns with Paul Ryan on budget policies, and he tells the world his hero is George W. Bush. So this gives you an idea of where people say, "Where are you coming up with the idea of
right here?"
His
name is next to Tom Cotton right here, and Adam Kinzinger.
Yes,
Adam
exactly.
Kinzinger.
He was one of the few congressmen demanding support for the Maidan coup in Ukraine.
It's true. That's what
Tom Cotton, the big neocon, Adam Kinzinger, such an obsessive neocon that he became a de facto Democrat against Trump.
This is a coup letter.
This is a support of the Maidan coup letter, and that's Ron DeSantis' name right on it and his signature right on it.
I don't know how you.
By the way,
I don't know how you get.
We could do a long forensic analysis sometime on that signature. There's some interesting. I think Ron's got some daddy issues, but we'll explain that in the future.
I'll leave that to the behavior panel or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not my area of expertise.
But basically, there was nothing. It's all the people saying, "Hey, Trump's got issues with his record." We've both been very critical of personnel choices, a bunch of things. It pales in comparison to DeSantis's congressional record and pre-governor biography, which is just as bad as it gets. It screams deep state recruit. It screams conventional politician. This is a guy that's never had a private sector job in his life, I don't think, except for when he was briefly at that elite school. That's not the background I want. I mean, we got too many career politicians as is. There's going to be scandals that are just sitting there waiting for the people to use whenever they want to down the road. You just can't be at Guantanamo and Fallujah during that time period and not have touched something problematic, or at least people credibly claim that you did.
Yeah.
And
look what they did to Mitt Romney, man, over cutting the hair of a gay kid. They made him into this monster. And
I mean,
by
over
the way, I mean,
dogs and women's photos and books. I mean, they get to it would be they could take him apart. He has been suckered into running because it's to destroy him. Because I think during part of the pandemic, and we'll get to that.
These are the same people who destroyed Ted Cruz's future. They are. They don't give a damn because, Robert, they feel. I just told this to one of these donors. They don't care. They feel if they do nothing, then they've lost. They're cut off again. Trump is playing hardball this time. He didn't play hardball the first time, where if you try to screw me this time, I will make sure you don't work at the White House for any candidates that I support. He didn't do that last time. He tried to make everything right.
He didn't do it. He rewarded all his enemies. And I'd been telling people in Trump's camp, the way to get Trump's attention is to go up and slap him in the face, and then he'll drop to his knees and beg to give you a job, because he gave all of his enemies jobs, and he gave none, and he didn't reward enough of his friends and allies.
Those criticisms from like Ryan Gradusky and others, those are true. But the problem I personally have with them is voters don't give a damn about any of that. Voters care about whether or not you kept your promise to them. That's because you are burnt, bro. You're butthurt that he didn't give you a job and didn't give you enough credit. That's the difference between me and some of these other guys and girls, Robert. I don't need Trump to make a living. I have my own business, and these people were trying to ride the Trump train. I was just trying to give accurate polling. That's the difference. Let's listen to this, because compare everything, the litany you just gave about DeSantis, and compare that to this message you heard in Waco from Trump, because I really do think this is at the heart of DeSantis's fall with the collapsing poll numbers. The
stakes of this election could not be more clear. Either we surrender to the demonic forces abolishing and demolishing and happily doing so our country, or we defeat them in a landslide on November 5th, 2024. Either the deep state destroys America, or we destroy the deep state. That's the way it's got to be. We're at a very pivotal point in our country.
Yeah, exactly. And that sums it up right there.
It really does, man.
Destroys America, or I destroy the deep state. And it's the deep state that is putting DeSantis up to running. I think they've suckered him into it. It's a sucker's bet. He should use these early warning signs that he's been getting bad advice, that this is a bad idea, to not pull the trigger and run and salvage and save his political future. Running against him will end his political future, or any political future he could have. So that, he made a major mistake. Some of us told him at the time he was making a major mistake. He went ahead and did it anyway. And so that's why he's in trouble. And it's a good transition into the pandemic mythology that's built around DeSantis.
Yeah. Don't let us forget the CIA poll. Okay. Because of the CIA and JFK poll, because this all ties in. Why do these younger voters support Trump over these other rhinos? Well, look, these types of things. But yeah, let's get which one you want to pull up first, because there's quite a few of them in there. I mean, they're all this concept that, and it's, look, my wife worked for the state of Florida at the time. So this is something that it's like, definitely there's a big difference, Robert, between rhetoric and reality. All right. Yeah, let's see. Let's look at the Suncoast one first, shall we?
One brief response to people in the chat. They're like, oh, Trump promised all this in 2015, did none of it. Actually, no. Trump was running on that he would be more competent in 2015 and 2016. He was like, these wars are bad policy. These trades are bad policy. I can negotiate better deals. He ran on, if you put me in there, the system will realize that I'm right and that I have the better skill set, and that we'll get better outcomes. He didn't even use the word deep state until after he was in office and started to realize what his obstacles were. And for people being
he did
hypercritical,
badly misunderstand, though. I mean, that's something
totally,
you and I
the issue
criticized
wasn't
him on a lot.
he didn't run in 2015 on destroying the deep state. He didn't understand it existed in 2015. He didn't understand it existed until 2017, 2018. And he didn't understand the scale of it until they stole the election from him in 2020. So and for people like, and we've been very critical of a bunch of personnel choices Trump made. But the reason why I'm not hypercritical of him is John Kennedy made the exact same mistakes. Ronald Reagan, you want to know who put Anthony Fauci in power? Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan, you know who put Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court that stopped any Roe v. Wade from being overturned for almost 30 years? Ronald Reagan. So, I mean, the Reagan made a lot of the same personnel mistakes. Trump didn't understand the scope and severity and the depth and depravity of the deep state until the 2020 election. And then he was under constant threat of impeachment and indictment. It froze him from doing anything. But he has shown signs in these speeches to be much more policy cognizant and aware than he was before. So for people who say he made these exact same statements in 2015, no, that's just false. And number one. And number two, what's the probability? My question is always alternatives. It's not Trump versus ideal. It's not Trump versus perfection. It's Trump versus DeSantis. It's Trump versus these other alternatives. Are these other alternatives more likely to give you reform of the deep state when people like DeSantis have been long recruited by the deep state?
Well, Robert, I don't know, it's the personnel choices. I don't think anybody was more critical of him over personnel choices than you and I from the beginning. It was like a military junta in there for a friggin' second. We didn't like it at all. Mad Dog Mattis, all these other people, J.R. McMaster. I mean, you got to be kidding me. H.R. McMaster's a disaster to put on your National Security Council or anywhere near as National Security Advisor. Flynn was different because Flynn understood. It's just, again, I can't believe somebody like Flynn, who had the career he has, thought the FBI was the good guys and talked to them without the lawyer. I just can't believe that. But all being said, we criticized him when others did not. What my issue is now is, how are you going to argue that somehow someone else who has the Bush team around them is going to do any better? It's laughable. These people, at least one is earnest and wants to try to do better. The other one is just bullshitting you. Pardon my French.
Well, and people are like, oh, well, you know, Trump talked about draining the swamp. First of all, he didn't start talking about that until September of 2016. That wasn't in 2015. Number one. And number two, it came from Steve Bannon, the term. Three, Trump thought of it in terms of draining the swamp of incompetence. The realization of the deep state. I mean, and this is good good transition in the pandemic policy. Why did Trump ever endorse any of it? Because Trump started out as, I'm not pushing back against any lockdown or major public health intervention.
This is April 2020, Robert.
Yeah.
Or June 21st, 2020. Yeah, oops, sorry, let me get that.
We'll get to this with DeSantis. But the pushback against Trump, first on Trump on the pandemic, the key to it, firing. Brownstone Institute did a recent piece on what their belief was. I mean, I was part of that story because I had tweeted out that I would build a statue to Trump if he would turn down, because he looked to be the only leader in the world even contemplating not doing a lockdown. Yeah. And Trump retweeted me and said, don't worry about it. Later that same day, in part because of that tweet, by the way, I remember there was a massive coordinated campaign against Trump that told Trump three things. They said, actually, this isn't a normal virus. It's a Chinese war virus, bioweapon virus, that maybe they leaked deliberately, maybe they did accidentally, but it's not like your normal flu. Number two, if you don't take emergency action that we're recommending, you're going to be responsible and blamed for the deaths of millions of old people. Millions.
Of your own voters. Remember that? Your own voters.
Yeah, your core constituency. And then third, but you're so uniquely, they played to his vanity, they played to his ego. You're so uniquely brilliant at cutting through red tape. If you really push through everything aggressively, Operation Warp Speed would come out of this ultimately, then you can save millions of lives and go down as a hero, go down as an icon of all the greatest, one of the greatest presidents of all time. And the key was who was telling them this. And there's a couple of key participants here. One of them that people have forgot was Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson took the complete bait and thought that the pandemic was really, really bad. And so he went down personally to make that pitch to Trump at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah,
So,
and then he had
Tucker
Dr.
Carlson got
what's his name
totally
on?
tricked.
He had Dr. What's his name on like every night. That guy with the glasses. What the hell is his name? He's all right. He's all right guy, but he totally fell for everything. He did.
Completely.
Totally
And people
fine.
forget, Jack Posobiec fell for it. Steve Bannon, God bless his soul, fell for
He did.
it. Mike Cernovich fell for it. Scott Adams fell for it. All these people that were independent influencers in the Trump world, all were telling Trump the same thing. But here's the second key: was who was leading that pitch? Who is the number one person responsible for the pandemic policies? It's someone that looks a lot like DeSantis today, by the way, and it was Vice President Mike Pence. Pence was the saboteur all the way through for the deep state throughout Trump's entire term. It's Mike Pence's people that takes out General Flynn, which in turn takes out all the white hats from replacing the entire deep state apparatus that Flynn was in the process of doing. I know because I would represent some of those white hats down the road when Mueller targeted him, because Flynn, unbeknownst to him, had been creating a list of white hats for them to target and take out. But that was Mike Pence who led that effort. And then it was
Michael Anthony. Got rid of Anthony. Sidelined Anthony, which was, for people who don't know what we're talking about, it's the last
a bunch of key personnel
America
people.
First voice on NSC.
It was Pence all the way through. And that's when people say DeSantis would be magically different. It's like he reminds me a lot of Pence. And Pence was terrible as vice president. Pence was the deep state's favorite ally. So it's because of Pence that Trump ultimately goes along and reverses course and says, okay. But even there, by April 23rd, 2020, you can look it up, he's out telling people we need to open up, we need to open up, we need to open up.
I have a date here from an important, and people don't mind that I'm not on the screen right now. I'm just trying to look for this date. Jennifer, April 23rd, 2020. Trump. You see states are starting to open up now, and it's very exciting to see. 3 weeks before, at the turn of April, Trump, we cannot have the cure worse than the disease. And they're like, oh my God, it's going to recommend opening up. People have to understand. Again, this is where Robert and I were highly critical when he did this. It's not that Trump locked anybody down, but he allowed the CDC to provide cover to governors to do it. That's why. And by the way, red state governors, not all of them did, but most of them, including DeSantis, went along with it because he had an older population. He just did, folks. I mean, I got the article dated in June, 3 months after Trump is advocating for opening. DeSantis is still cracking down on businesses and hurting people. My wife, 8 months pregnant, is still forced to wear a diaper on her face and go feed kids who can't feed themselves, which, God bless her, I'm glad she did. I'm proud of her for doing. But if the kids are out of the school still, not allowed to go back to school, and God forbid, even if they get close to the school, they better be wearing a mask, right? Yet she has to go in pregnant, be around everybody in close quarter, and feed kids who, listen, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, there are sadly a lot of children in this country. If they don't go to school and eat, they don't eat. So my wife volunteered for this program that feeds kids when school's not in. When they closed down the schools, they did not close down that program. And if you had put your hand in the air for it, you had to do it. And it didn't matter if you were pregnant or not, you were going in to do it. And she was constantly, look, I'm pregnant. I can't breathe with this damn thing on. Didn't matter. All right. You want to, and God forbid, Robert, you were one of the people who would walk away. Your career's over. Your career's over. You had no choice but to do that.
And the thing is, so basically, nationally, Trump was one of the only people pushing back against the lockdown narrative. He was the last one. He didn't want to join it, was very reluctant, got massive pressure, then went along with it, and very quickly was pulling back on it. Within 3 weeks of states starting to do it, he was like, no, we need to rethink this, reconsider this. And then he starts being publicly critical of the CDC by June. He's saying schools need to reopen now. The CDC is wrong. They're looking at the wrong data.
Which starts to fight with Fauci.
Exactly. He starts to exclude Fauci. CNN ran a story when DeSantis said he would have fired Fauci. That's just a lie.
Oh, I got that right here.
He
Let's
can't.
go.
Legally, he can't.
let's put this up. At the time when Trump is going on and on, they're just butting heads at this point. Fauci is lying.
The idea that Trump was pro-Fauci, he was anti-Fauci within a month into the pandemic. He had started to second guess all of the advice he had been given. And again, he's second guessing it before DeSantis is. He's second guessing it before Tucker Carlson is. He's second guessing it before a lot of these influencers are. He's again ahead of the curve on these issues. People were worried that he was going to try to get Fauci fired. And they point out Fauci doesn't have to worry about that because the president can't fire Fauci legally.
Yeah, the White House puts out this statement, even though he's like, nah, everything's good. And when Trump meant by everything's good is I'm the boss. It's still good. That's what he meant, even though people like Robert and I at this time are like, this is gone too far. And by the way, I got receipts, Robert. I got emails from me and you immediately. This is a bad idea. There's no precedent for this. We're going to destroy the economy. This isn't even going to be effective. Sharing studies back and forth. Here's 18 from the Singapore outbreak. Shutdowns did nothing. I have it. You and I, while Will Chamberlain, and I love Poso, my man Poso, all of them fell for it except for you and I. I love how everyone always pretends that they were like, it was like you and I being accused of killing grandmothers for weeks. What the hell are these people talking about? All right, but here they issued a statement that appeared to undermine the nation's leading infectious disease expert. Quote, I have a very good relationship with Dr. Fauci I've had for a long time, Trump said at the White House during a roundtable event honoring police officers. I find him to be a very nice person. I don't always agree with him, unquote. A senior administration official also told CNN on Monday that recent frustration with Fauci does not stem from a lack of confidence in him. It's not a crisis in confidence or a warning.
Who is that White House person?
Exactly. We all right. It's one of three people, and you know it. Same. Pence's. I don't want to use that word to describe her, but Pence's constant girl he would go to do things like this. But saying that it would be difficult to fire Fauci. Under federal law, Trump doesn't have the power to directly fire Fauci, a career civil servant, and remove him from government. And while Trump could try...
And that's why for DeSantis, for DeSantis to say he would have fired Fauci, it's just a lie.
It's not possible. Even if you tried to remove him, there's an appeal process, Robert, and he stays in place during that appeal process.
People talk about correctly. They criticize Trump for being critical of Kemp about how Georgia was handling things. But go back and look, folks. A bunch of states never issued stay-at-home orders. Trump didn't criticize any of them. So this idea that Trump was leading the lockdown efforts, was demanding the lockdown efforts, was ahead of everybody else, that all the other Republicans were reluctant and they didn't want to be part of any is just myth. Everybody was pushing for more lockdowns more than Trump. Everybody on the Republican side. And the states that didn't lock down, Trump didn't criticize at all. So in terms of South Dakota, Utah, Colorado, Tennessee opened up. A lot of Republican states, red states, Alabama only issued a limited stay-at-home order, either issued lockdown orders later, didn't issue at the same scale, or didn't issue at them at all compared to DeSantis. Now let's talk about DeSantis's record on the pandemic. Because most of the good stuff from DeSantis didn't come until late 2021. Some of it only happened late into the pandemic. So first of all, DeSantis locked the whole state down for a month. Was one of again, many states did not issue complete stay-at-home orders. DeSantis did. When Trump was saying we can't have the cure be worse than disease,
which I was wrong. That was 4 weeks earlier. I'm sorry.
4 weeks earlier. He's saying that by the end of March. And then in April, he's saying we got to open up. Guess on April 23rd, when he said that, Florida was still locked down by Governor DeSantis. So that's part one. Part two is when DeSantis would keep a partial lockdown in place until September. He shut down all the schools until August. So this idea that he was leading the way against the lockdowns is a complete lie. It's a total fabrication. DeSantis was imitating Trump to the nth degree and usually more pro-lockdown than Trump was throughout this time period. And Trump was always one step ahead of DeSantis at pulling back on these things than DeSantis was. But I mean, you have the news headline. He was threatening bars and other places with fines and penalties for not social distancing in the summer of 2020. The idea that, he reversed course. People got confused about this because the media highlighted when DeSantis was not as extreme as Cuomo. And so people think Florida was this free state all the way through. No, it wasn't. Those of us that know about how the law was working through that time period know that, in fact, Texas was generally more free than Florida through most of the pandemic. Tennessee was more free than Florida through most of the pandemic. Alabama was more free than Florida throughout most of the pandemic. Iowa was more free than Florida throughout most of the pandemic. South Dakota was more free than Florida through. I could go on and on and on.
This is late June, dude. This is late June.
And read the headline so that people can hear it.
It says DeSantis cracking down on Florida businesses not practicing social distancing, says median age of new COVID-19 cases is trending in younger direction. And by the way, it didn't. All right. It really didn't. Now, overall that we looked at it, now that we have a longer span of data, the beta, delta, and other variants that came out, they really didn't trend younger. Not as far as fatalities anyway, and like serious sickness. It said that he held a press conference on Saturday that announcing that he is cracking down on Florida businesses that are packed and not social distancing. In particular, these businesses mostly involve bars and restaurants. The Department of Business and Professional Regulations are going to be enforcing capacity limits. The Surgeon General is also reissuing a public health advisory. The guidance touches on 5 key points in particular: elderly and vulnerable individuals, which, by the way, he will later use for the vaccine push; practicing social distancing, wearing a mask in public settings, staying home when sick, frequent hand washing and sanitization. I mean, nothing different here than
June 20th.
I was just going to say, Robert,
20th.
This is 14 days to slow the spread, and by June 21st.
Exactly. So he locks down in April, keeps a partial lockdown all the way until September. And even in June, he's threatening people and threatening businesses with fines if they don't do social distancing and masking. The guy is himself often running around with a mask outside when he meets Trump once on the tarmac in the summer. Trump doesn't have a mask. Nobody around Trump does, but DeSantis does. So this illusion that he was leading the curve and he would have fired Fauci immediately and he never would have done a lockdown are lies based on DeSantis' own record in Florida.
Here's a quote of him. I'm just going to read it. We recommend follow CDC guidelines the whole time. I've not preempted locals from doing what they think is right. At the same time, you have to enforce that and you have to make a decision about what penalty is appropriate. And again, this was a key media talking point. If you don't remember, folks, this was a media talking point that now it's shifting from younger people to younger people. And yes, younger people are getting infected by these less dangerous, more infectious variants of COVID-19 because they were mutating, right, to be more infectious but less dangerous. And it was infecting younger people, but it wasn't resulting in increased, mortality rates among young people. In fact, it was getting less because it was actually less dangerous. And it was reactionary. I mean, that is just the truth, ladies and gentlemen. I hate to say it. Fast forward 6 months. One thing I will say, Trump's one of his biggest weaknesses is on the vaccine. Pushing the vaccine the way he did because he wanted, and that's ego driven. He wanted it to be, he wanted credit.
Well, he thought it was the exit plan. Everybody was telling him, if you don't want to lock down, if you don't want any of these things to happen, and you don't want to be blamed for millions of deaths, you have to do a vaccine. And you're the only person who's bold enough, strong enough to get Operation Warp Speed and to get it through. So his ego was pitched. But even on the vaccine issue, once again, the mythology of DeSantis is more myth than real. I give him credit for coming around on the vaccine issue, but initially he was worse than Trump on the vaccine.
Robert, the very first person, and I know that Trump quote tweeted this on True Social just last week, but the truth is they've had this in the barrel for a long time. I was actually talking with Laura and others about this weeks ago, months ago now, because when this whole narrative started, and Laura and I were remembering watching Fox and Friends. This is after Trump has been defeated now. COVID was appropriately, or effectively used to remove him from the White House. And we're watching DeSantis on Fox and Friends. The very first day Pfizer's vaccine is available, he's happy. You know what? Eat and grin, ear to ear. We're going to give it to the elderly, the vulnerable first. This guy's 100 years old. He's a World War II veteran. He's healthy as a horse, still kicking. And I'm like, Laura, wouldn't it be horrible And Laura was like, what if he just like croaks right now, or worse, even just a couple weeks from now? That happened. So Fox failed to run that story. But the very first guy who got jabbed, which Ron
and again,
DeSantis
DeSantis has this huge press conference. He's bringing him out, pays a bunch of taxpayer dollars.
They're both guilty of that, my friend. Both
to get the vaccine, promotes the heck out of it, tells pharmacies and other people if they don't use it on people that they're going to have funding and other issues face them, and threatens them basically with it. And as what Richard's talking about is in a big high profile, brings an old veteran out, says, here, you should get the vaccine. Here's why you should get the vaccine. Injects the guy, gets the vaccine. He dies soon afterwards. DeSantis doesn't say boo about it. The Fox doesn't talk about it at all. And I think we have a thing, 6 months, 9 months, however long, for a long time into the vaccine, DeSantis was one that was promoted it more than Trump ever did. So I saw people in chat, oh, DeSantis never promoted the vaccine. You weren't paying attention. DeSantis promoted the hell out of the vaccine.
Oh, my God. I got a Fox News article right here. Are you ready? I mean, and this is just simply untrue. They both, because for Trump, for reasons that, we certainly understood at the time, we just thought he was wrong. But, I mean, Trump's out of office at this point. He's gone,
really?
And, yeah, I mean, look, pretty doggone close to 100. If fully vaccinated Floridians' chances of surviving COVID is pretty doggone close to 100% if you get vaccinated. I mean, folks.
And look at when that is. July
22nd, 2021.
So, midway through the whole vaccine launch, he's telling people he's promoting and advocating the heck out of it. He's saying this will solve your Trump statements are much weaker in promoting the vaccine than DeSantis. And as you point out, Trump is no longer president, so he no longer has any political power. This is while he is Governor DeSantis is holding press conferences saying how wonderful this vaccine is.
Later, almost a full year after the election later, Robert, look at this comment. If you're vaccinated and you test positive, but you don't get sick, well, the name of the game is to keep you people out of the hospital. Well, that sounds like Anthony Fauci verbatim. 75.
Yes,
when we were people like us were coming back and saying, guess what? It doesn't prevent, right?
Yep.
75% of Floridians over the age of 50 have gotten shots. So we think that's really, really positive. If you are vaccinated,
that's DeSantis taking credit for how many people he got stuck with the needle.
If you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, the chance of you getting seriously ill or dying from COVID is effectively zero. If you look at the people that are being admitted to hospitals, over 95% of them are either not fully vaccinated or not vaccinated at all. And so these vaccines are saving lives. They're reducing mortality. That's Joe Biden. Verbatim.
Yeah, and as one of the chat points out, not only was he shutting down schools, shutting down businesses, shutting down restaurants, shutting down places.
Pfizer filthy rich.
Completely, yeah, he did. He promoted the heck out of the vaccine for the better part of a year, made sure as many people in Florida got it as possible. But as people point out, he was shutting down nursing homes. He bragged about how he was shutting down visitation to nursing homes with older people who couldn't be connected to their family. He did all of this. And let's go to the last part. He says he would have fired Fauci. Well, he has his own Florida Surgeon General out there. Steve Deese has bought into the big lie that he says, Fauci, how we know that DeSantis would have fired Fauci is DeSantis fired his own Florida Surgeon General and replaced him with somebody else. Complete lie. Now, I don't think Deese knows it's a lie. I think he's repeating a lie he's been led to believe, a mythology he's been preached at, but it's completely false. The Florida Surgeon General, and we can pull up the Wikipedia link on the guy. So this was Scott Rivkees. He was a huge Fauci fan. This is a guy, again, Florida's version of Anthony Fauci. How did he get his job? Ron DeSantis gave it to him. Ron DeSantis appointed him. That's who gave him the job, number one. Number two, did Ron DeSantis fire him? No, just the opposite. Late into the pandemic response, over a year late, Rivkees' contract, which was a special deal because he had an interchange relationship with the university, ran out. What did DeSantis do? Did he fire Florida's Fauci? No, he extended him another 3 months. It was only when he could no longer legally work that finally DeSantis got a different Surgeon General. But even when on his exit, he promoted him and talked about how great he was. So not only would DeSantis not have fired Fauci, DeSantis would have given Fauci a promotion. Because how do we know that? Because that's what he did with Florida's own Fauci.
Dude, he made sure the guy got recognized by the state Senate for his duty to keeping kids safe. Here he is, pivotal in keeping the schools closed down, and then he put him in charge of reopening them, which was in fact a total and complete joke. And then later that led to the fight, which is where DeSantis began to be what he is portraying himself to be. Alachua and Broward would, when the schools reopened, well, not immediately after they reopened, later, everyone wanted to do away with the masks. And then Alachua and Broward, by this time, this guy's long gone. Fauci, the Florida Fauci is out at this point.
It's late 2021, early 2022 that is DeSantis starts rewriting his COVID script. Yeah. To his credit, that's when even here there's limits.
He left in September of 2021, right before the new year. This is when the schools began to reopen.
And he gets his new Surgeon General in the it's actually confirmed by the Senate in February of 2022. That new Surgeon General is really good. That new Surgeon General is the one that starts second-guessing the vaccines, that leads DeSantis to start second-guessing the vaccines. And then it's when DeSantis is saying no mask mandates in schools. Then it's when DeSantis... Now, even here, the laws are limited. Did they pass a law banning vaccine passports? Actually, no. They passed a law banning documentation for vaccine passports, but you're legally still allowed in Florida to require them as a condition of access. You just can't request the written proof. So if you're willing to lie, you can get service. That's not exactly a great vaccine passport bill. Vaccine mandates, he allows doctors and hospitals and people in medical settings to do it by explicitly. The state of Florida has the ability for the Surgeon General to force vaccines on people anytime they want. And despite many requests, DeSantis refuses to reverse that law. The actual vaccine mandate allows vaccine mandates as long as you allow for testing and masking as an alternative. Otherwise, it's just federal law. He has one nice addition about COVID immunity, but that's about it. So he has one of the weaker vaccine mandate laws that are passed. And last but not least, the final proof that DeSantis is not what he pretends to be on the issues of the pandemic, in the sense of the guy that would have fired Fauci had he been president in 2020 instead of Trump, which is his claim to fame now, is the fact, why has he passed a law and he's about to reaffirm it? He passed it in 2021, extended it in 2022, is talking about extending it in 2023, that says everybody who followed Fauci's advice cannot be sued even if they killed your loved one, even if they killed him by negligence and recklessness. That he has passed the broadest, the one place you can't sue about remdesivir. By the way, Fauci was DeSantis, big promoter of remdesivir, not a big promoter of hydroxychloroquine, not a big, like Trump throughout the whole pandemic got massive criticism because he kept promoting alternative treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, anything that could work, solar therapy treatment, you name it. He got all this criticism for it when he was obsessed with trying to find solutions. DeSantis often wasn't doing that. And he gave complete immunity to everybody in Florida. If you remdesivir, you can't sue in Florida, thanks to DeSantis, who gave immunity to the hospitals, immunities to the doctors, that as long as they followed Fauci, they were immune from suit. So would DeSantis have fired Fauci? No, he's lying about it. He would have likely promoted him and extended him, just like he did his own version.
I think, too, there's, because that's clearly his strongest, whether it's real or not, that was his strongest bet.
It's mostly myth. People like Steve Deese really think he fired the Florida Surgeon General in the middle of the pandemic. Completely false. Completely false. Steve Deese is, he wrote The Fourth Reich. He's very well informed on this topic, just not about DeSantis. DeSantis mostly rewrote his history in late 2021, early 2022, when Trump was no longer president, and he rewrote it conveniently to fit the script for a 2024 campaign. That outside of him being publicly critical of the vaccine beginning in 2022 and saying there's a grand jury there, he's done nothing of substance different than almost any other lockdown governor did.
He would have been better off just being like, you know what, I did what the president did, and I listened to the advice of experts until it became very apparent that they were not following the science. So then enough was enough. That would have been a much more persuasive argument.
Down deep, like Trump was desperate to reopen the economy and stop massive
he knew
death.
It was his Achilles heel.
Whereas DeSantis, his goal, he reacts like a politician. Like, why were Cuba and China so terrible during the pandemic in particular? It's because it appeals to the ego of a statist. The ego of a statist and a politician is that only I can solve your problems. And look at how great it is. Like in Cuba, they're still bragging about, oh, look at how we stopped COVID in Cuba. No, what you did is stop your economy and trigger a revolution. So, good luck with how that works out for you in the post-Castro commie era in Cuba. But DeSantis showed the same signs, the sins of a politician. Not only is he like uber pragmatic sometimes to his detriment, but he was desperate to prove to people how he was solving the problems and how he was leading the curve. And I mean, he was bragging about flattening the curve all the way into the summer. Which was, always nonsense. There was lockdowns. It played to his ego. Trump never said, look at how great it is that we locked things down. He said this is a terrible thing and the cure can't be worse than disease. Whereas DeSantis is bragging about it several months into it. Why? Because he's a politician. He wants to prove to you that as a politician, he can solve your problems. And the problem with that is that proves to me that DeSantis would have been worse as president in 2020 than Trump was had he been there. And that ultimately it's not a reason to support his candidacy in 24. It's a reason to be skeptical of his candidacy in 2024 because he has all the sins of a politician, of which flip-flopping on Ukraine is just one example.
Well, before we get into more other polling, I got it because there's another side of this, which I know, I'm tempted to say that only diehard Trump supporters would care about this, but I wonder if that's really true because there is something that to be said about, of course, you don't want to be just loyal to a person, but there is something to be said about people wondering whether or not if somebody's willing to stab Trump in the back, right? Like if a politician's willing to stab Trump in the back, then how if somebody you owe so much to, let's be real, he does. Then why wouldn't they think twice about stabbing me in the back as a voter? They don't even know me, really. I'm just a voter. Matt Gaetz said something during the rally in Waco that I think was damning because he ties DeSantis to Cruz in this. And I'm going to roll the tape, get your thoughts. It's not that long. Let's check it out.
Only Donald Trump could have rescued us from Hillary Clinton. Without Trump doing 3 rallies in the final week in the 2018 election in Florida, my governor today would probably be Andrew Gillum. How weird is that? And without Trump dragging Ted Cruz across the finish line, your senator would probably be Beta Beto. So Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, patriots of the MAGA movement delivered for you in your time of need. Today, Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz should endorse Donald Trump for president and stand with us as we were so proud to stand with them.
Before we get into the mixing of the Ted Cruz, I just have to say this before kicking it to you. Because I think that was intentional. All right, I do. Because he's about to be the next Ted Cruz if he continues down this path. But what Gaetz was saying, I think he's being a little nice there. Probably no. If it wasn't for Donald Trump, we definitely would have had a meth head on the DL as the governor in the state of Florida, by the way, who was also under federal investigation. Like we reported and like we were attacked for reporting, he was indeed under federal investigation. They only, of course, indicted him because he robbed Democratic donors and they make calls and they want the FBI to do something when their pocket's been picked. All right. When your pocket's picked, no problem. The FBI is not going to get off their ass. When their pocket's picked, believe me, they're going. But I polled it. I was there. And by the way, that's something that's funny. I was one of only 2 pollsters that did have DeSantis barely eking it out. We were the only projection model on the internet to have DeSantis winning that race. And it wasn't because we thought Ron DeSantis was a better candidate than people are giving him credit for. He wasn't. He was a horrible candidate, monkeying it up. Remember that on Neil Cavuto? I mean, he almost killed his campaign in the crib, bro. All right. If it wasn't for Trump, and the voters in Collier County, in Lee County, in Monroe County, in Pinellas County, and everywhere else, in Marion County, coming out in numbers never seen before in a midterm election. Collier County hit its 2016 turnout percentage by the time it was noon that day. All right. So I remember it and I polled it, and it wasn't Ron DeSantis. It was them knowing that Trump was going to be impeached if Democrats had a good midterm. They came out and Laura, she was here, she'd tell you, it was like an army. They came out to defend their president from that. And Ron DeSantis just benefited from it. Ron DeSantis won with more votes than Rick Scott, but there was only 2 candidates in the Senate race with Rick Scott. There was 7 in the gubernatorial election, and Ron DeSantis didn't even hit 50%. So that he would not have been the governor if it was. Matt was being real nice, saying probably. Probably is too nice. He would not have been elected governor. He would have lost to Andrew Gillum if it was not for Donald John Trump going all around the state multiple times in the final week saying, vote for Ron. He's my guy. By the way, Adam Putnam would have rocked him in the primary if it wasn't for Donald Trump saying, no, don't listen to Tallahassee and the GOP consultant class. Ron DeSantis is my guy. All right. So that's what happened. I mean, you want to go back and look at the polls pre-Trump endorsement versus post-Trump endorsement. Ron did nothing. All he did was get the Trump endorsement, and then he won the primary. And I do think there was a social bias. And by the way, that was part of the smear effort over the weekend too. He said I was going to lose to Andrew Gillum. They showed a poll from April of 2018. April! Jerry Willis from Fox Business, who was set to do an entire segment on our tracking poll in the last 5 days, got daily updated numbers from us. Everybody knew where I ended up. All right. And by the way, they still thought Ron was like Big MAGA back then at Fox. So guess what they did that night, Robert? I'm waiting for Jerry to call, got the camera set up. We're going to do this segment. No, we're not, because Florida looks too good for Trump and his allies. So we're cutting the segment. They spiked the segment because they didn't want it to look good at all for Trump. So they didn't let us go on and say, before, by the way, it was not just election day. Like, there was supposed to be an entire segment on pollsters doing very badly in Florida. Here's a pollster who didn't. He's been tracking it for 5 days. What do you got, Rich? That was what it was supposed to be. And they spiked it because they didn't want Trump to get a win. Now they're all for Big Ron because Karl Rove and, their friend
Rupert Murdoch.
are all for
Rupert
Big
Murdoch has decided. So you're going to see favorable stories about him in the New York Post, in the Wall Street Journal, on Fox News. The Murdoch empire is clearly behind him. The thing is, I don't think, though, in his own best interest, because there's nobody who looks at this and says, who really understands the Republican and the general election politics. If DeSantis runs and beats Trump, it's the end of DeSantis's entire political career, because certain part of Trump's vote will never vote for him because of that. Again, George Soros came out and said this explicitly, said the beauty of DeSantis running is he takes out Trump and takes out himself in the process. And DeSantis is the only one who doesn't get this, because they're playing to his ego and his wife's ego and ambition.
Yeah, sure.
To be president. He could have been president if he would have aligned with Trump instead of abandoning and betraying Trump. And Robert, your point is correct. Like people said that he had let Trump believe that he was going to be on the ticket in 2024 ever since 2021. And he only reversed course very late, and Trump got that sense, and that's why he started going after him. Trump is actually trying to wake him up to not run, because it does destroy him. It's not because Trump really thinks DeSantis is going to beat him. Trump knows his base. Trump knows he's going to roll through and beat DeSantis anyway. But he sees it as damaging to the party, damaging to the general, et cetera, and damaging to DeSantis. And so he's taking all these shots now so that he reconsiders his options before he makes a suicidal campaign run. That's the upshot of all of this. DeSantis running for office is his running for the White House against Trump is political suicide. Not because he necessarily loses to Trump, though I think that's extremely likely, but because even if he wins, he loses, because part of the Trump base will never forgive him.
On that, not only we went over the Trump specific and, not only him, but all the candidates specific support. We went over those numbers before. You would need, for scenario A that you're talking about to not happen, you would, at this point, based on the data, what we're seeing, you would need an absolute collapse in Democratic turnout in 2024. That's what you would need. Number one, history tells us parties come out to defend their presidents. That is not going to happen. George W. Bush's voters did. Barack
not
Obama's
in
voters
the era
did.
of mail-in voting.
And mail-in voting is a new right. But look at this already, Robert. Certain to vote, 83% Democrat. It's a little bit higher for Republicans, but this early for a presidential election, I've never seen this before. It's usually in the 60s at this point. Never is it this early, this high. All right. So that's number one, just to blow that ridiculous, oh, well, maybe he won't have these people who hate him like Trump does, come out. Trump always motivates these people who hate him to come out. We've already been over the numbers. He does, but he motivates people who love him and only him, and they are more. All right. So that's, I mean, it's right
All
there.
it takes is a game of trade-offs, folks. It's not a magic situation. It's not ever just addition. It's always addition and subtraction. You just want there to be more addition than subtraction. Trump is always a more addition than subtraction guy.
So that's 100% the truth. It is a constant evolving equation, and your job is to get to net gain. That's it. Look at this question on the CAA, because I know we're burning to 4 o'clock.
Yeah, that's a good thing to wrap up on.
It's a good thing because I got Gorka at 4:20. That should be fun. How likely do you think it is that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved in the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy? Robert, 24% very likely, 24% somewhat likely. It was slightly less with registered voters, 2 points less, but likely voter samples where we're at. Somewhat unlikely, only 13%. Very unlikely, only 17%. 23.2% were unsure. And I'll even show you the social bias indicators with that. Those people are so full of crap. They just don't want to admit it, Robert. They're afraid. They don't know who I am. Oh, yeah, sure. And even if I say, oh, yeah, I know that guy, big data poll. I know the people responded. They may be like, this could be the CIA posing as the people fund. That's where people are these days. Look at it by age. This is why, again, back to the Glenn Greenwald comment, this is why the MAGA vote is a younger vote. And here, this should not surprise anybody. If you have been listening to us, it shouldn't surprise anybody. But look, the Mr. Rogers mindset of the 75-plussers, 65 to 74 even, they're less than others. It's the younger, it's the working people and below, Robert. They think the CIA did it.
Oh, absolutely. And what you're seeing is the older establishment believe in the government, believe in the FBI, believe in the military. That voter, that Bushite voter, is literally been dying. And the last vestiges of them are in this older upscale group. Yeah, they're literally dying. And your younger MAGA voter, your younger populist voter, is not going to vote for a generic Republican. They've proven that now in consecutive midterms in 2018 and again in 2022. They proved it actually before that in 2012. When Republicans won the House in 2010 and 2014, they were unusually low turnout electorates that are never going to happen again amongst an electorate that no longer exists. So that's why the only path forward is a Trumpian path forward. And the fact that amongst the younger population, none of them really buy into the mythology, the Bill O'Reilly kind of base of the Kennedy assassination, that your numbers are in the single digits when you get to the younger population, and you talk about Zoomers, you talk about even millennials. When you're talking about the more populist side of that equation, that those people don't believe for a second in the official narrative, in the way that just only a few last living older establishment folks who still believe, that the flag and the military is too honorable, too honest, and our CIA are just good, Jack Ryan types running around saving America. That's a mythology that the younger generations don't buy for a heartbeat.
That's it, man. I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, the myth of the good G-man was always just that, a myth.
Oh, completely. That G-man was busy. Mark Felty's busy breaking into your house, breaking into your medical records, trying to bang your wife when he got too drunk late at night. That's who these guys were. The J. Edgar Hoover. I still get people who send me, "Oh no, Jay, all those stories are false about J. Edgar, Robert. Okay. He didn't like to dress up as a woman and didn't have a gay lover his whole life. No, he didn't love little boys, and the mob didn't have tapes of it. And that's why he tried to pretend they didn't exist for 30. No, he was an honorable stand-up G-man. Quit living in fantasy land, folks."
He destroyed people who actually did try to live up to that role. Melvin Purvis was somebody who he unleashed on the babyface Nelsons and the John Dillingers, and he actually didn't want to get his hands dirty like that, but eventually Hoover was the one who said, the story we tell people is a lie. Get your hands dirty, execute them if you got to, take them out. And they did, and he did. And what did he do? Because Melvin Purvis, his star rose, Hoover got jealous over Melvin Purvis. And all you got, good folks, you want a quick history lesson? You should really Google Melvin Purvis's son's take on the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And by the way, even in the Al Capone days, Robert, they needed the untouchables from the Treasury Department. They weren't called the untouchables because they weren't in any danger. They were called the untouchables because they were viewed as actual men of integrity, as opposed to the corrupt FBI they couldn't rely or trust for a second to pursue Al Capone and his men, because they were taking money. They were taking payoffs. They were taking whatever, women, whatever, gambling, debts.
FBI had the favorite gig was to get assigned to Vegas because they would party it up when they got there during the mob days. But what this is a reminder of is the overlap. I mean, you pull on a lot of these kind of topics, and it's seeing an increasing trend. The younger populist group, the kind of group that's leading the next wave of political independence, is a group whose politics is overwhelmingly populist, skeptical of the state, skeptical of corporate America, skeptical of institutional America, skeptical of the church, skeptical of the media. These are people that your conventional cookie cutter consultant class type candidates like Ron DeSantis have no chance to win. So if you care about DeSantis, you should want him not to run. If you care about the party, you should want DeSantis not to run. If you want to beat Joe Biden or anyone else in 2024, you should want DeSantis not to run. Or if you just care about populism and the opposition to the deep state, then you should it's Trump or bust in 2024.
Let me just read this real quick, okay? A person familiar with the strategy around Yulin spending, the donor, the Republican donor, who gave DeSantis a ton of money, $500,000 and one contribution towards re-election, said that right now, for those of you who keep sending me tweets about the Axios story, quote, the brakes are pumped, adding, the polling really made people pause, unquote. So all of a sudden, they turned the spigot off on him, guys. Let me explain to you what happened. They stopped answering Ken Cuccinelli's phone calls. They said, get lost and come back to me if and when you are competitive. Why do you think that story is in Axios today? All right. You think Spencer Kimball is at Emerson College saying, I think, you know what I'll really do today? I'll really come out with a Trump plus 41 in New Hampshire because I'm super Trumpy. Okay. Do you think the guys at Harvard are like, I think I'll come out with a Trump plus 30 because I'm super Trumpy? Guys, again, you want to fall for this crap, do it on your own time. Leave it off my timeline. It's very, very amateur hour. All right. If you believe that stuff, it's like you weren't alive during 2015 and 2016. I don't know what else to say. All right.
Yeah.
Continue watching.
If you care about populism, if you care about the party, or you care about DeSantis, convince him not to run, because it's political suicide for him to do so. And these fake polls in Iowa and New Hampshire leaked to Axios and these other places are not going to get you anywhere. And if you see all these people attacking Trump supporters as being grifters, they're confession through projection. You got a bunch of people in the influencer space who either plan on or already are taking money from DeSantis connected groups on social media, and they're pretending that they're just being independent and they're all the rest. And we know a bunch of them in Florida. Bill Mitchell.
Yeah, one of them is why Big Data Poll has a pay up front policy. You know better than anybody that we didn't always do that. We did not always require clients pay up front. We had to, because one of DeSantis's biggest supporters, and I'm going to drop the bomb on him when I feel good and ready to do it, is a deadbeat. He's a deadbeat who changes his filings every 2 to 4 years because he never pays his bills. He runs up massive bills, grifting, puts it all in his pocket. His primary challengers lose, and then he reestablishes a different super PAC in the next election cycle. That's what he does.
And I get a kick out of when people tell me I should vote for DeSantis on the pandemic, and it's coming from, say, and then I see Will Chamberlain saying we should vote for DeSantis. Will Chamberlain is one of the biggest lockdown supporters, vaccine mandate supporters, all of that. It's like, why would I listen to those people? They've already discredited themselves at critical times on critical issues.
Will, I take him as a nice guy, but he's
Oh,
remember
he's
the
a nice
emails
guy,
I
he's a
was
smart
telling you?
lawyer, but he was so
Yeah.
utterly abominably wrong. And a lot
You
of
and
them,
I are actually referencing him in one of those emails I was telling you about. You and I are actually discussing one of his tweets and arguments like, this has to happen. We've got to lock down. You're going to kill a bunch of people. And me and you were like, this will not age well, and he is actually in one of those emails, among other people, but he features prominently because he fell right on it, man. I mean,
there's three groups I see surrounding DeSantis, none of whom I think actually have DeSantis' best interest at heart. One are grifters looking to cash in one way, shape, or form from the DeSantis donor class. There's a bunch of them. The second group are people that were on the wrong side of the pandemic. And the third is or people who are on the wrong side of the election. I mean, how many people that are DeSantis supporters were bashing Carrie Lake for pursuing her case to the Arizona Supreme Court? And then she wins one of the most important election cases in the recent era. Even if she doesn't get to the governor's chair, that victory is critical for election integrity and transparency moving forward. And we know how bad the Arizona Supreme Court has been on some of these issues. No, I mean, the Democratic legal establishment was shocked by the Arizona Supreme Court decision. That's why they had to quickly put out the fake news cycle and all the rest. So the credit to Carrie Lake. But why are there so many people dismissive of of election issues also on the DeSantis train? Not a good sign who's surrounding DeSantis.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, it's just not even like I said, if you're going to use some of these, whatever you want to call them, historical irregularities to try to attack somebody's polling record, I mean, that does not smell of MAGA. And I got to be honest with you anyway, it's just not right. It was just they went after me in 2020. They're like, you didn't get any of those Rust Belt states right in 2020. I got every single one of them right. My final poll in Minnesota was Biden plus 10. My final Wisconsin was Biden plus 2. I didn't want them to be, but that's the truth. So I put, or what I thought was the truth. We talked about this, and I said if I miss anywhere, it'll be because it was too Democratic. I had the electorate projected too Democratic. Ironically, Robert, the electorate was more Republican. So you guys take that for what you take it. But Pennsylvania, Biden plus 2. I mean, do we have to keep going? Iowa, Trump plus 10. Ohio, Trump plus 10. Florida, Trump plus 3. I mean, you couldn't get any closer if you were like Nostradamus looking into the black ball, dude. I mean, it's like I sold my soul to the devil to get so accurate all the time. And I have one miss in Pennsylvania, and it's, oh my God. My biggest misses are better than their pollsters' best days. And by the way, they're all the people who went after J.D. Vance. They're all the people who went after Oz and then continued to hurt Oz throughout. They're all the people, who went, and backed Kemp, obviously, because they're Kempers and they're making such a big deal over that. So, I mean, look, it is what it is. You, again, support who you want to support. My job is to tell you what the numbers are. But don't sit there and pretend to me like, this is like sufficiently not Rhino or something. It is Rhino. It is.
And on
Scott
the two
Walker
other
and Ted Cruz all over again.
Correct. And on the two other components, like from a betting perspective, I thought turnout would be more favorable to Trump in 2020 than it turned out to be. Now, I attribute that to a lot of questionable ballots coming in those states. I think without those illegal ballots that violated the Constitution because their signatures wouldn't have matched on the mail-in votes, then Trump wins Wisconsin, Trump wins Arizona, Trump wins Georgia, Trump maybe even wins Pennsylvania. But so that's where I ended up misgauging was on the turnout factor. I think I nailed. I actually had Trump getting 74 million votes. I mean, it was like literally almost to the T of how many votes. I thought Biden would get 76 million, and he got 81 million. And as the census said, only 76 million people reported voting. Just saying, just put that out there. 5 million didn't know they voted. Democratic Party did a good job of helping them. But then in 2022, I made the mistake of believing this millennial generation of suburbanites would vote for more conventional Republicans when issues of wokeism were throughout the culture. I was wrong, and I've learned the lesson. Don't go that strategy. That strategy has no chance for the Republican Party. So so I missed on 2022 because I made the mistake that DeSantis supporters are making right now, which is that there's this big group of suburbanite type voters that will return home when the temperamental Trump is no longer on the ticket. And I knew, and we had discussed, that there are a bunch of working class voters that didn't vote without Trump at the top of the ticket. I was hopeful they would turn out that time. They didn't. So those two things that I was wrong about in 2022 is exactly why it's Trump or die in 2024.
And which is pathetic because he's not a young man. They should have, in 6 years, Robert, they should have figured out a way to incorporate these people and move forward. This is a massive catastrophe for them. And by the way, Ron DeSantis could have had a moment here to do that, to be a younger, less rigid version of him. And you know what? Tallahassee's not DC. You know, the vice presidency is like what, beneath you? You know, it's not good enough for you being a Trump beat away from the presidency. You could have learned how disgusting DC is when you are really on the side of the people, how they'll come after you and what they'll do. You should have got your bearing first, you know, and then they could have brought these people into the fold. Now
it's what he was planning on doing, what his Trumpian advisors were telling him to do. He ignored them, pushed them to the side, and the deep state knew his Achilles heel, which is his ambition. He had his sins are the sins of a politician, kind of like George Corley-Wallace, that they found his ambition and his wife's ambition, and they're using it against him. And, you know, maybe this terrible, because the reason for my view of the blowback is, one, nobody really wants him to run against Trump down deep, not within the Republican Party, outside of the people
outside
actually.
of them.
You're never Trumpers and other people, and your globals. But the other aspect is people saw a politician that they saw too much of one. And that's why his rollout, his numbers went down rather than up. Your number's supposed to go up when you do a rollout, not when you go down, not go down. But they're seeing a guy that's like this, like the Ukraine thing highlighted it, the Steve Hilton part you showed. It's that he is like, the smart position was to take Trump's position on Ukraine. That's the populist direction, less involvement, non-interventionism, etc., for this ongoing potential risk of global World War III. And it's kind of ironic, Europe's going nuts over Putin putting missiles in Belarus. Well, didn't we say that, Putin was overreacting by us putting missiles closer and closer and closer to Russia? It's kind of he puts a little in Belarus and all of a sudden that's okay. But using the Romney taglines, all that, what they saw last week was the worst side of DeSantis, which is a politician. And that doesn't sell well. Yeah. And it's not going to sell well. So he still has a chance at redemption, but that path is Trump. It's not challenging Trump.
Yeah, I'll just leave it there because I think that says it all. I really do. All right, next time, brother, tell people where they can, go hit you up. It's on the screen.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. That's where you can find all the content. This poll that Richard just showed is courtesy of the Public Polling Project. Continue to support the Public Polling Project. Richard has the links there at Locals and elsewhere. That's what makes it possible to know what's really going on in the electorate, what's really going on within the primary, be able to use that data to forecast where certain communities and constituencies may go moving forward. And interesting stuff like the Kennedy assassination and mindset shifts amongst generations and economic groups and cultural groups in the country. So continue to support the Public Polling Project to make that a possibility and reality going forward, so you can have polls that are actually not secretly paid for by candidates. A bunch of these are like the Axios polls, or basically you can plan. I mean, those polls were screened bogus.
Group that's not DeSantis supporting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no,
it's like, come on, what a crock.
Not aligned with him. What?
Yeah, I mean, when even people that hate Trump, like Sienna, like Quinnipiac, like Monmouth, that have been anti-Trump polls in the past that skew upscale, Trump's vote is heavily, like you look at private union sector workers who may vote in the Republican primary. There's more than people realize, particularly in the industrial Midwest, but we're the general election. But in the primary, they're voting. DeSantis is in single digits, right? I mean, Trump is it's like 57-7. That vote, those working class voter groups are generally undersampled, and yet these media polls are showing DeSantis dropping like a rock, even with demographically skewed polls in DeSantis's favor. And there's a reason for it. It's not just about tracking the polls or trending with the polls. It's because DeSantis, the politician, doesn't sell well, and the populist base is rallying behind Trump as Trump begins to enhance his populist message and develop it. More anti-deep state, more anti-war, more more better trade deals, more of that logic. Don't screw with Social Security, don't screw with Medicare. To do the smart populist positions that can deliver a populist majority in 2024. Oh, you're on mute.
Whoa. Thanks, bro. As always, all the best. Thanks for joining us, Robert. We'll catch you again soon, all right?
Take care, everybody.
Take care. As Robert Barnes, everybody. And don't forget, Wednesday, noon, Eastern Standard Time, Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm going on Sebastian Gorka here in about 10 minutes to further talk about this poll, or 20 minutes, something like that. So go on and check that out if you're going to. Don't forget about our sponsors in the descriptions, the video descriptions. Always for Patriots, Brickhouse, of course, Jam and Bean. All the codes are in there. Use them and save yourself some money. And we'll see you on Wednesday. All right. All the best. The links too, they're all over social media if you want to go check out the polls. But there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of good stuff. All right. Take your time, look through it, be thoughtful about it. We'll start nesting some of them, but be thoughtful about it. All right. Because, it's all there. It's all there, folks. It's all there. Nobody shows as much. Nobody is as transparent as we are over here when it comes to these things. No, it's not even close. Not even close. All right. We'll see you guys soon. All the best. Another episode of What Are the Odds will hit you soon. Maybe as we get a little bit more into the silly season, we'll pick it up. But look for them like once a month, something like that. All right. All right. Later, folks. Deuces.
Shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting it. Overdrive from town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning.